23rd December, 1944 Bastogne, Belgium, 101st Airborne Division, encircled by 47th Panzer Corps Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, commanding defenders General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commanding Besiegers, Corps metric, 241 cargo planes of IX troop carrier. Command primarily C, 47 seconds in 1 day, at about 140 miles per hour. Fog that had concealed the Ardennes for several days rose. Above 1,000 feet, shortly before 900 p.h. German forward observers on the eastern ridges saw the ceiling lift for the first time since the pocket closed. First came scattered P-47 fighters circling high. Then the low thrum of twin engines grew into a continuous roar as long serials of transports crossed the horizon from the west. 241 aircraft of IX Troop Carrier Command flew in perfect order. Nearly all were C-47 Skytrains hauling 4,000 pounds apiece at 140 miles per hour. Over the tiny drop zones inside Bastogne, red, green, yellow and blue parachutes burst open in steady sequence. German 20mm and 88mm batteries threw black shell bursts across the sky, yet the stream never wavered. From icy hills the besiegers watched bundle after bundle drift safely into American hands. In 4 hours, 241 sorties poured badly needed ammunition, food, fuel, and medical supplies into the pocket. Starvation and ammunition exhaustion had been the certain path to surrender until the sky opened and proved otherwise. Bastogne lay where 7 main roads and a railway line met in eastern Belgium. German 5th Panzer Army and 6th Panzer Army required those routes to feed 30 divisions westward toward the Meuse River and Antwerp. American First Army needed the same roads to shift reserves across the front Hitler had split open on 16th December. Whoever held Bastogne controlled movement through the central Ardennes. By 20th December, the town sat inside a tightening ring. 26th Volksgrenadier Division held the northern and eastern sectors. Panzer Lehr Division closed from the west with its remaining tanks and assault guns. 2nd Panzer Division waited southeast with additional tanks ready to exploit any collapse. All 3 formations belonged to 47th Panzer Corps under General Heinrich von Luttwitz. Inside the pocket, more than 22,000 men of 101st Airborne Division plus Combat Command B of 10th Armoured Division and scattered artillery units defended a perimeter roughly 12 miles across. Snow covered the ground 2 feet deep. Daytime temperature never rose above 20 degrees Fahrenheit. German staff officers calculated precise shortages. Artillery fire was cut to a handful of rounds per gun each day. Small arms ammunition and medical supplies ran low. Rations were reduced. Winter clothing was whatever each paratrooper had worn from Mourmelon, and frostbite cases mounted steadily. Weather had grounded most Allied aircraft over the Ardennes for days. Cloud ceiling stayed below 500 feet, with visibility often under 200 yards. German commanders believed low cloud gave them absolute air denial over the pocket. General von Luttwitz informed 5th Panzer Army headquarters that encirclement plus continuous artillery harassment would force capitulation within 72 hours. Relief from 3rd Army still had to fight its way north from Lorraine, with leading elements assembling around Arlon, more than 20 miles south of Bastogne. Time and weather appeared to favour the besiegers completely. Every road junction in Bastogne became a fortified strongpoint. American engineers felled trees and blew craters to slow German armour. Paratroopers dug foxholes through frozen earth with bayonets and helmets. German infantry advanced village by village, accepting heavy losses to shrink the ring day by day. Panzer Lehr assault guns pounded the town centre hour after hour until most stone buildings stood roofless. Snow muffled the crash of shells, yet did nothing to ease the cold that crept into every cellar and barn. Across the fields, German observers watched smoke rise from Bastogne and waited for white flags that never appeared. Each silent hour convinced them the Americans neared exhaustion. 5th Panzer Army headquarters already drafted orders for 2nd Panzer Division to pass through Bastogne on 24th December once the garrison surrendered. Maps showed clear roads west to the Meuse, only 60 miles away if the crossroads town fell on schedule. Inside the shrinking perimeter, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe moved his command post 3 times in 4 days as German shells found each new location. He refused to consider surrender, yet understood the arithmetic of ammunition, and food was merciless. Only the sky offered any hope, and the sky remained closed by thick cloud that showed no sign of breaking before Christmas. German commanders slept soundly on 22nd December night. Their siege worked exactly as doctrine predicted. Starvation, cold, and lack of ammunition would do what tanks and infantry had failed to achieve in 5 days of direct assault. The ring was complete. The weather held. Bastogne belonged to the side that controlled the ground around it. 22nd December. 1944. 4 German officers crossed the snow under white flag to deliver General von Luttwitz his ultimatum demanding surrender or total destruction. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read the passette. Message in a frozen cellar, consulted his staff, and sent back the single word, nuts, that echoed along the American line and meant nothing to the ammunition count. 501st, 502nd, 506th, and 327th glider infantry regiments now held a ragged perimeter, 12 miles around, with ammunition and artillery shells strictly rationed in units such as the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion. American batteries fired only occasional missions that day, a silence that told every battery commander across the ring the defenders had little left for a serious barrage. 26th Volksgrenadier Division infantry lay within a few hundred yards of American foxholes. Panzer Lehr Panthers waited hull down west of town, and assault guns blasted roadblocks whenever a helmet showed. 2nd Panzer Division kept a reserve of tanks ready southeast on the Marsh Road, certain the garrison would raise white flags before dawn. Siege arithmetic ruled every German headquarters. Ammunition inside the pocket was being consumed far faster than it could be replaced. Medical supplies had already run short, rations were down to bare minimum, and many wounded could no longer to be moved for lack of fuel. Cloud ceiling never rose above 500 feet, visibility stayed under 200 yards, and German officers believed the weather would continue to keep Allied aircraft largely grounded. General von Luttwitz informed 5th Panzer Army the town would fall without further armoured attack once cold and hunger finished what encirclement began. 2nd Panzer Division received orders to pass through Bastogne on 24th December, the moment surrender came. Across the snow, German soldiers warmed hands over tiny fires and listened to the quiet that meant the Americans were finished. American paratroopers scraped ice from M1 Garand chambers and counted the last 8-round clips by candle stubs in cellars that smelled of wet wool and blood. Surgeons of the 326th Airborne Medical Company worked on kitchen tables with 1 lantern and morphine syrettes, running low after days of continuous operations. Artillerymen of the 401st Glider Field Artillery Battalion sat beside 105mm howitzers that had fired their final rounds hours earlier, and now waited only for crews to disable the breech blocks when Germans walked in. Every foxhole held men stretching single K rations between several soldiers and trying to sleep hugging rifles to keep the bolts from freezing solid. Frostbite turned fingers black in growing numbers, and no vehicle could easily reach the aid stations because fuel was almost gone. In the command post under the Heinz barracks, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe moved among maps marked with red circles that shrank inward every hour, while his operations officer crossed off another battery that reported 0 shells remaining. Outside, the wind drove snow against shattered windows, and the temperature dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit before dawn on 23rd December. Across the white fields, German infantry stamped feet in shallow trenches and watched the same low cloud that had become their most reliable ally. Lookouts on the ridges saw only drifting smoke from Bastogne and heard almost no return fire when their mortars dropped rounds into the town every 15 minutes. Panzer Grenadiers of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division cleaned carabiner 98K rifles, certain they would need only bayonets soon. Crews in Panzer Lehr assault guns brewed real coffee captured from an American convoy days earlier and calculated how many hours remained before the Americans starved. Forward observers called the town a ghost position because so few muzzle flashes answered their ranging shots after dark. Every company commander reported the same thing. The defenders were finished, and white flags would appear once the next artillery concentration walked across the last strongpoints at first light. On advanced airfields in France, crews of IX Troop Carrier Command waited beside rows of C-47 Skytrains already loaded with bundles wrapped in red, green, yellow and blue parachutes. Each aircraft carried 4,000 pounds of artillery shells, small arms ammunition, medical plasma K rations, and canned heat tied beneath 100-pound parachute packs. Pathfinder teams from the 101st Airborne Division sat aboard the lead machines, wearing the Screaming Eagle shoulder patch and carrying Eureka radar beacons that weighed 20 pounds apiece. Pilots kept engines turning every hour to prevent oil from freezing in the sumps. Crew chiefs checked static lines and door bundles for the 100th time, while squadron commanders walked the line asking the same question: any break in the weather yet? Radio operators listened to the Bastogne homing beacon that transmitted a weak signal through the storm whenever the set there had electricity for a few minutes. Every man knew the ceiling needed to lift above 800 feet for only 4 hours, and 241 aircraft would fly straight through the flak belt over the pocket. They had waited 6 days already, and the latest forecasts still showed solid overcast ahead, yet no one removed the chutes or unloaded the cargo because orders remained: take off the instant the cloud base rises. Inside Bastogne, the night of 22nd December passed in near silence, broken only by distant German voices and the occasional cough of a mortar tube. American soldiers pressed against each other for warmth and tried not to think about Christmas 2 days away. German soldiers in the encirclement line felt victory so close they could measure it in hours. Both armies watched the same low sky that had not opened once since the battle began and waited for the morning of 23rd December to confirm what each already believed. At 09:30 hours 23rd December 1944, the cloud base over Bastogne rose abruptly from 500 to 1,200 feet in less than 30 minutes, and Pathfinder aircraft already turning. On runways, 200 miles west, received immediate takeoff clearance, while German lookouts on the eastern ridge stared upward in sudden alarm as the first high cirrus appeared through gaps that widened by the minute. 2 C-47 seconds, carrying Pathfinder teams lifted off within minutes, flew east at 140 miles per hour and reached the pocket, dropping men through intense 20mm tracer streams that stitched red lines across the fascians. Sky. Yet every Eureka beacon landed intact and began transmitting within minutes of hitting the snow west of the town. 241 follow-up aircraft formed serials of 20 to 30 planes. Each crossed the bomb line at 1,000 feet and descended to 500 feet above ground, flying tight V of V formations that filled the air with the roar of 482 engines, while P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs orbited in stacked layers from 2,000 to 10,000 feet, ready to pounce on any Luftwaffe reaction that never came in strength. German 88mm batteries around Hemrul and Flamierge scored direct hits that sent C-47 seconds spiraling into the snow, trailing black smoke and burning fuel. Yet the remaining aircraft never wavered, held course and speed, and released hundreds of coloured parachutes over the tiny drop zone in steady sequence from 1,200 hours onward. Each bundle weighed between 60 and 300 pounds and carried artillery shells, medical plasma, small arms ammunition, K rations, or 5-gallon petrol cans, swinging beneath red, green, yellow or blue canopies that drifted down through scattered 20mm bursts and landed mostly inside the defended area, where paratroopers ran forward under fire to drag the loads behind stone walls before German mortars could range them. About 144 tons of supplies reached the ground in just a few hours, and the drop continued without pause, even as burning aircraft fell on the outskirts and crews bailed out at 300 feet. Several transports were lost or badly damaged to flak, but the delivery outweighed the cost many times over. By 1400 hours, American 105mm howitzers that had stood silent for 36 hours opened rapid fire on German assembly areas east of the town, while machine gun positions that had husbanded single belts all week poured sustained bursts into the woods where Panzer Grenadiers tried to mass. From the ridgelines, German officers watched coloured parachutes, still hanging in leafless trees like strange fruit, while working parties collected the last bundles under direct small arms fire and realised in the space of one morning that encirclement no longer meant isolation when the sky belonged to the enemy. German forward observers on the hills east of Bastogne radioed frantic messages at 12:15 hours 23rd December 1944, as hundreds of coloured parachutes covered the snowy fields behind American lines. And within minutes, the first 105mm shells from batteries thought empty began exploding among their own positions, while machine guns that had fired only single shots for 2 days now ripped off long, sustained bursts that forced Panzer Grenadiers to ground across every sector. Panzer Lehr headquarters received confirmation at 1300 hours that the pocket had taken full air resupply and watched American artillery expenditure leap from near zero to normal defensive volume in under 60 minutes. A reversal no staff officer had believed possible 12 hours earlier when silence ruled the town. From every ridge, German binoculars saw paratroopers dragging bundles through snow under direct rifle. Fire saw jeeps that had not moved for days, suddenly racing between aid stations with full petrol cans, saw medics carrying plasma boxes into cellars that minutes before had no morphine left, and realized the arithmetic of starvation had been cancelled by 241 aircraft flying at 140 miles per hour. Luftwaffe fighter strength in the west had been badly attrited, and no effective interception reached Bastogne before the last C-47 turned west, leaving the sky empty except for drifting smoke from burning transports that had paid the price for the airlift. General von Luttwitz stood at his command post window and watched coloured parachutes, still caught in bare trees, while renewed American shellfire walked across the positions of 26th Volksgrenadier Division, and understood in that moment that encirclement no longer guaranteed surrender when the enemy owned the air above the ring. Reports from every division confirmed the same bitter truth. The garrison fired more shells in the first hour after the drop than in the previous 4 days combined. Small arms fire intensified along the entire perimeter and wounded. Americans who should have died for lack of plasma began appearing bandaged at the front again. 5th Panzer Army headquarters cancelled the planned exploitation by 2nd Panzer Division through Bastogne because the road net remained blocked by defenders, suddenly stronger than before the airlift began. 241 sorties against a weakened and overmatched German fighter force became the cold ratio that collapsed the siege before it reached its calculated end. And German commanders who had slept certain of victory the night before now faced a reinforced strongpoint that could hold indefinitely, while 4th Armoured Division already drove north from the Arlon area with open roads and clear weather ahead. On 26th December 1944, at 1400 hours, tanks of the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armoured Division, crashed through the thin German screen south of Assenois after a 5-mile running fight that cost 9 Shermans, yet opened the last 3 miles of corridor wide enough for supply trucks to roll north, while paratroopers of the 326th Airborne Engineer Company blew gaps in their own roadblocks to let the first vehicles enter Bastogne since 19th December, and the siege that had begun as a classic strangulation ended not with white flags, but with the roar of American engines and the handshake between 2 exhausted officers in drifting snow. The air bridge flown 3 days earlier by 241 cargo planes, primarily C-47 seconds, had delivered enough ammunition, fuel and food to turn a starving pocket into a fortified hinge that anchored the entire southern shoulder of the bulge and denied 5th and 6th Panzer armies the road net they needed to reach the Meuse. 4th Armoured Division suffered heavy casualties and significant tank losses in the 6-day drive from the Arlon area, yet linked up on schedule because the defenders still held every village and ridge thanks to the more than 140 tons of supplies that fell from the sky on 23rd December. German commanders later wrote in their reports that the moment those coloured parachutes opened over Bastogne, the traditional logic of encirclement died in the Ardennes winter because a surrounded garrison with air superiority above it could be sustained indefinitely, and the psychological weapon of isolation lost its edge forever. 5th Panzer Army withdrew the remnants of Panzer Lehr and 2nd Panzer Division westward under constant air attack, while 26th Volksgrenadier Division dug in for a defence that lasted into January but never again threatened to close the road south. The 101st Airborne Division and its attached units received the Presidential Unit Citation for holding Bastogne. Yet every citation and every post-war study on both sides agreed the true turning point came at 1200 hours, 23rd December, when 241 transport aircraft flew through flak at 500 feet and proved the sky could feed an army the ground had cut off. The cold metric of hundreds of tons, delivered at the cost of a handful of transports, rewrote siege warfare in one clear morning and taught every general who studied the campaign that encirclement without air denial was no longer encirclement at all.